Thank you, Florian. Yes, I'm going to talk about the effect of incentives on willingness to participate in an app study. This whole session is actually willingness and participation in extra tasks. So I think that's quite apposite because this is part of a broader program that we're doing to see how we can get respondents to do extra tasks. And when I say we, there's myself, there's Annette, who's at ISA, and Mick Couper, who's over there. So it's based around Understanding Society, which is UK household longitudinal study. Started in 2009, but there is a part of the sample which is older than that. It's a household survey, so we try and interview all adults in the household. There are annual interviews. It started off as face-to-face only, but from about wave 7, wave 8, we went more web first. Now about 85–90% of households are issued web first. But there's also an additional innovation panel. So when the study was set up, our funders were thought it very important that we have innovation at the core of the study. So they funded an innovation panel, which started a year before the main study, and that's been going on ever since. And that's a way of testing new questions or new ways of asking existing questions. And so I'm going to be using data from the innovation panel for this presentation. So I say we're trying to get respondents to do additional tasks rather than just the annual survey. And getting them to do the annual survey can often be a challenge, but then we want them to do extra things on top of that. And when we started the innovation panel, a lot of the experimental proposals we got were all about the main survey, so advanced letters, incentives, reminders, everything around the annual survey. But we've noticed over the years, as the ownership and use of smartphones has increased, that more researchers want extra data. They're not just interested in the core survey, they want all of these extra add-ons. So we do quite a lot of work on consent to data linkage. We've done between wave surveys, we've asked about biomeasures, asking people for a blood sample, a sample of their hair. Last year we asked for a stool sample, which, people don't like that. So don't do that. But app studies, we've had 5 or 6 different app studies where we've tried different things, different topics. And so I'm going to be talking about one of those later. And thanks for the warning about the low text size on the screen, so I brought one up so I can see it here. This is from a paper that Annette, Mick and I published in Fiscal Studies last year, based on our research, but also research from other people, most of whom are in the room. So we were looking at the steps that people have to go through to participate in an app study. So they have to have a compatible device, they have to be willing and able, they have to be able to find the app, then install it, log into it, you'd have to use it, and then they have to keep on using it. And this is partly what Mick was talking about earlier with adherence to the protocol. And then we looked at different reasons for why people could drop out at these different stages, and then what sort of fieldwork protocols could we try and manipulate to try and increase participation. And the one that I'm going to look at mostly today is incentives. So this is based on a Sea Hero Quest app, which was in the 16th wave of the innovation panel. It was developed for Alzheimer's research, and it measured spatial navigation, which is apparently one of the first things that starts to deteriorate as you develop Alzheimer's. So at the beginning of each level, there were 17 levels. The user got that little map on the left-hand side, then that disappeared, and then they had to direct their boat to the flag. And each of these levels got harder and harder. It was gamified because it went into different locations. So this was an ice-based one, and there's one with sand, and there's a tropical one, and those stars up there, as you collect those, you can decorate your boat. And so it was trying to encourage people to take part. One thing we found was, we were very surprised about this, there was no mode difference between CAPI and web on take-up. So in other things that we've tried, interviewer face-to-face surveys got a higher consent rate or a higher take-up rate. But for this, we didn't find any take-up between people who were issued web first or issued interviewer first, and then also by the mode of interview, there's no difference. But we did find that the higher incentives motivated people to use the app. And by use it, we mean they downloaded it and they started it and they completed at least one level. So you had the data. So those who are in the £10 group, about 43% started. Those in the £30 group, about 51.4% started it. And of all of those people who started it, the higher incentive group were also more likely to complete it. So the high incentive did encourage people not just to start it, but to give us more information. But we found that it didn't actually reduce the bias. So a lot of the work we do, we then look at who was in the app using sample compared to who was in the overall sample. And so who's underrepresented, who's overrepresented. And a lot of what we find is younger people are overrepresented, women are overrepresented, people with higher levels of education are overrepresented. One thing I've noticed actually is, as we've been doing these over the years, the age at which the older group who are underrepresented is increasing. And that could be a cohort effect as people get used to it, or it could be the fact that I'm getting older, so I always want the older age group to be at least 10 years further ahead from where I am. But here, the younger group are those aged under 61. We also find in some of our other studies that task-related behaviors did have an effect on take-up. So, for example, on a spending study we had, we found people who used their smartphone to keep track of their bank balance were more likely to download an app for the spending study. People who used apps to keep track of their health were more likely to take part in a well-being study. And here we ask questions about how often people used their phone for games, and we overrepresent regular and occasional gamers. The higher incentive itself didn't reduce that bias. It increased the proportion who took part. So in the £10 group, regular gamers were more likely to take part than occasional gamers, but in the £30 group, although both of the proportions went up, the proportions of occasional gamers went up higher, so there's no significant difference, but it didn't actually affect the bias. And we find that actually it's not technical issues that are the problem, it's willingness. So we have about 5% who just don't have a compatible device. Then there's this group in the middle, this, a couple of percentage points who couldn't find the app, or they couldn't install it and they couldn't log in. So the biggest obstacle that we're finding is willingness. It's just people who don't want to do it. So we started to look at what other levers do we have to encourage participation. So if the technical problems are becoming less important, it's this willingness and engagement which is becoming more important. So these are the sorts of things that we have starting to look at now, including things like how the app is introduced. So one thing we're looking at in the future is an activity tracker, but we think that might encourage people who are more active. So are there other ways we could describe it? So I want to thank you. There's more information on the project page, and I mentioned the innovation panel competition. There's a deadline for the 26th of March, so if you have any ideas for anything for next year's innovation panel, please just go to that website. Thank you.